Under the cold glare of the interrogation room lights, I sat with my hands resting flat against the steel table. The air was stale, touched by a faint scent of cheap disinfectant, and the ticking wall clock behind me seemed louder than the breath in my lungs. I hadn't slept in 24 hours. That never used to bother me. But this room, and who sat across from me, made everything feel different. "She's an unemployed drunk," Nate said without hesitation. The words hit harder than I expected, like a second betrayal layered over years of silence. My throat tightened. Not from surprise, but from the sheer audacity. He said it with such calm conviction, like it was a fact so widely known it barely needed repeating. I stared at him jaw slack for just a second too long. He knew exactly what he was doing. Detective Ruiz didn't flinch. He just scribbled in his notepad, eyes darting between us with calculated neutrality. His suit was well worn, a thread loose at the cuff. The kind of man who'd been at this long enough to spot bullshit but patient enough to let it unravel on its own. "I see," Ruiz said, glancing at me. "Miss Mitchell, would you like to respond?" I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stared at Nate, wondering if he'd planned this before he even stepped into the precinct. Had he rehearsed that line in the mirror? Did he test it out on someone else first? He wasn't even nervous. His posture was relaxed, legs crossed, fingertips drumming lightly on the table's edge. Just like at the reunion last year. "She's just a burnout," he'd said back then when someone asked about my work. Everyone had laughed nervously and looked away. My mother said nothing. Today he had a captive audience and a more dangerous stage. "I'm not sure why she's even here." Nate continued, feigning confusion. "She's been off for a while now, since she left her job or whatever happened. It's been rough for her. Like, I wasn't even in the room." Ruiz cleared his throat, pen still poised. "You mentioned she contacted you last week?" "Why?" "Oh, that." "Yeah. She said something about a hit and run. Totally out of nowhere. Said she thought I was involved." "Can you believe that?" He laughed, casual light, like someone recalling an absurd office rumor. "I tried to be nice about it, but she got intense." My fingers curled under the table. He knew what he was doing. Gaslighting me in front of a cop. Not just denying, but reframing. Weaponizing charm. "Miss Mitchell," Ruiz prompted again. I took a breath and held it. I could feel my heart beating in my teeth. "Stay calm, let him dig his hole." "You okay?" Nate asked, all faux concern now. "I know this must be hard." I looked at him like he was a stranger. But he wasn't. He was blood. And that made it worse. He smiled a little, the kind of smile you give someone you know you're about to beat in a game they didn't even realize they were playing. "I'm not delusional," I said finally. Nate blinked. "No one said you were. You implied it." He leaned back. "I'm just worried." And that was when I remembered the day after the accident. The dew hadn't even dried from the grass. I was walking my mother's dog past the Carter property. Nate's black Escalade was parked crooked in the driveway. Fresh paint scratched off the bumper. Bits of a cracked headlight on the asphalt. I knew what I saw. I looked back to Ruiz. His pen had stopped moving just barely. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "Do you need me to clarify anything?" Ruiz blinked. "I was going to ask the same of you." Nate snorted. "See what I mean?" I turned to him fully now. No more games. No more letting him narrate the version of me he needed for his convenience. 12 years, I said, voice even. I worked for the CIA for 12 years, not 3, not in filing. The room fell quiet. Nate's smile faltered just a flicker, but I caught it. Ruiz looked up slowly, then set his pen down with deliberate weight. "What did you say?" And just like that, the ground shifted. You spend over a decade risking your life in silence, and somehow they still think you're a failure. There's a unique sting in watching people rewrite your life while you're sitting right there quietly chewing turkey. Thanksgiving 2021. Aunt Evelyn's house. Her dining room had that brittle, curated charm-bone china tight smiles, 1,000 judgmental glances sealed inside every antique cabinet. Claire's between jobs right now, Nate had said, wine glass in hand, looking like a real estate magazine had come to life. He chuckled like it was a harmless joke. She's sort of figuring things out. Laughter fluttered around the table. No one looked at me directly, not even my mother. I remembered squeezing the edge of my plate, carving my fork into a pile of mashed potatoes like they might tell me what to say. I'd just come off a 3-week debrief after an overseas operation. I'd flown into DC the night before, dumped my bags in my shoebox apartment in Arlington, then rented a car just to be here for this. No one asked about my flight. No one asked where I'd been. And why would they? As far as they knew, I was a burnout, a typist, a woman who couldn't keep a steady job, whose father left, whose mother never quite raised her voice above a sigh. The wedding in 2019 was worse. It was one of those summer weddings where everything smells like sweat roses and too much money. Nate had cornered the mic during the toast. "And here's my cousin Claire," he said, gesturing toward me. "She works in government somewhere, typist or maybe HR. She's the quiet one." A roar of laughter. I smiled. I even raised my glass. And then I excused myself to the parking lot and cried behind a pillar for 7 minutes. After that, I spent 3 weeks tracking a weapons broker across Jordan. There's a cruel irony in spy work. You become so skilled at disappearing people, start believing you never mattered to begin with. The worst part isn't the lie. It's that the lie fits too easily. They don't see the burn scars under your blouse. They don't know how it feels to cradle a bleeding informant until the light leaves his eyes. They've never had to lie to a mother about her son's death because the truth would compromise a treaty. All they see is a single woman with a tired smile and quiet shoes slipping in late to family brunch. By the time I was 36, I had missed more birthdays than I could count. I'd spent 5 Thanksgivings eating alone, one in a cobble safe house with a tin of cold beans. I'd broken off 2 real relationships and ghosted 4 more before they got too close. I once held my own hand in a hotel mirror and whispered, "Don't forget who you are," just to keep from unraveling. They never knew. And they never asked. I was sitting on the couch in my apartment, gray light pouring through the blinds, when Jesse called. I hadn't heard from him in 6 months, not since he went back underground after blowing the whistle on that tech for surveillance scheme in 2020. Jesse always spoke in layers. He was the kind of guy who couldn't say hello without 3 meanings tucked underneath. "Hey," I said, heart already tightening. "You alone?" he asked. "Yeah." "Good. Don't answer any unknown numbers for a while." That got my attention. "You found something," I said. "It's not just an accident," he whispered. "It's deeper, Claire. I think he's hiding more than just the car." I sat up. "Jesse, what did you find?" "I don't want to say over this line. Just, remember how we used to talk about rabbits?" "Yes. There's one in his books. A fat one. I'm tracking it." And then his voice changed, flattened. "Also, I think someone's watching me." I stood up and crossed to the window, instinct guiding me. My street was quiet, but it felt wrong. That old sixth sense, what I used to call the gut tick, was already turning. "Where are you?" I asked. He hesitated. "Claire, if something happens to me, look into the Glenstone account and tell your mom she was right about the orchids." "What, Jesse?" The call cut. No click, no static. Just silence. I stared at my phone for a heartbeat, then hit redial. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. 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 Still nothing. I texted, "Are you okay?" No read receipt. "Then call me." Nothing. The last thing he said looped in my head like a prayer gone wrong. "It's not just an accident. He's hiding more than you think. And I think someone's watching me." I clutched the phone so tight it dug into my palm. The air in the apartment turned heavier, like it knew something I didn't. I called again. Still voicemail. And that was the last time Jesse ever picked up. Nate always smiles like nothing sticks, but his eyes twitched when I mentioned the side mirror. I pulled into his cul-de-sac at exactly 2:07 p.m., gift bag in hand, smile rehearsed. Suburban perfection spread in all directions, trimmed hedges, recycled brick mailboxes, driveways waxed to a gloss. It was the kind of neighborhood where Halloween decorations went up on September 1st, and where no one ever suspected anything dirty happened behind plantation shutters. Nate's house stood proud at the corner lot, flanked by a maple tree just beginning to flush gold. His black Escalade gleamed like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. But I saw it. On the lower edge of the passenger door just behind the front wheel well was a tiny smudge of pale blue paint, almost invisible. To someone else, it would mean nothing. To me, it screamed. I rang the doorbell once and waited. Kids shrieked faintly from inside, the sound of cartoons echoing through the hardwood hallway. Sarah answered wearing a pink athletic set and a high ponytail that said effortless, but cost at least 20 minutes. Claire. What a surprise, she said too brightly. I was running errands and thought I'd drop off something for the kids. I said, holding out the bag. Just a little puzzle set I found, figured they might like it. She stepped aside. Come in, they're watching something. I'll get Nate. Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon, manufactured warmth. Their living room was staged like a magazine, spread matching throw pillows, white orchids, not a crayon out of place. The coffee table held a book on Tuscany neither of them had ever read. Sarah hovered as if trying to appear casual but uncertain whether I was a threat. I knew that posture. I'd seen it on diplomats' wives in embassies from Sarajevo to Bogota. It meant they knew something and wished they didn't. I heard about the accident, I said, keeping my tone soft. Scary stuff. She smiled thinly. Yeah, it shook everyone up. Nate said someone from the neighborhood saw it happen. I let the silence hang before answering. Something like that. Nate came in a moment later, sleeves rolled, the picture of domestic ease. Hey, look who it is. He hugged me like nothing had happened, like he hadn't accused me of being a drunk to the police 2 days ago. Nate, I said, stepping back. Nice car wash. He chuckled. Thanks, Sarah insisted. Said I was letting the dust ruin her resale value. Sarah shot him a glance. Too quick. Funny, I said. You missed a spot, though. Passenger side. He stiffened barely. A fractional pause. The kind of glitch you wouldn't notice unless you were trained to watch for it. I turned toward the kitchen window. I drove by Highway 27 the other day. Looks like they finally upgraded those traffic cameras, huh? There it was. A flicker. His right eye twitched once, then stilled. He blinked and laughed. Took them long enough, right? I smiled. Yeah. Shame it took an accident to get them moving. Sarah busied herself with mugs, but I noticed her hand trembled just enough to rattle the sugar jar. I should get going, I said. Just wanted to say hi. He walked me to the door like a gracious host. Let's not wait so long next time. Okay? Outside, I circled behind his SUV, kneeling just long enough to tie my bootlace. With my other hand, I slipped the portable tracker, a coin-sized scanner with GPS tether, under the wheelbase. It clicked softly into place against the metal frame. Camouflaged by dirt and shadow. Tech I hadn't touched in 3 years, now reborn for a suburban sting. I drove off without looking back. That night in my apartment, the blinds down and my laptop glowing dim, I checked the data. My stomach clenched. The Escalade had left his driveway at 10:14 p.m. The night of the crash, traveled north on Fielder Lane, then parked for 13 minutes, exactly 2 miles from the intersection where the hit and run occurred. The timestamp 10:27 p.m. That was the moment the witness said they heard the impact. He was there. He was there. And still he smiled like nothing stuck. Jesse was always careful. If he vanished, it meant something was coming. The hum of my encrypted laptop was the only sound in the apartment. Outside, DC traffic buzzed in the distance, but in here, it was war zone quiet. My living room had transformed into a command center, walls pinned with road maps, photos, red thread connections like a conspiracy cliché. The only thing missing was the smell of burnt coffee and a partner to talk me down. But Jesse wasn't answering, and that silence was screaming. The dead drop folder had been tucked inside an old Proton Mail account Jesse and I hadn't used since Yemen. He'd hidden the access key inside a .png file, an image of his late dog Bailey. I only thought to check it because of a random note in my journal: Bailey's leash. 3 red, 7 blue. It had always been our way. He'd called it paranoid layering. I called it life insurance. Once decrypted, the contents hit me like a wave. Spreadsheets, PDFs, banking logs. Shell corporations registered in Belize and Wyoming. One in particular stood out: Doverstone Holdings, LLC. The same name I'd seen on Nate's custom notepad 2 years ago at Thanksgiving. Back then, I'd thought it was just another real estate holding company. Now I knew better. Jesse had been tracing financial transactions from Doverstone to a dummy account linked to a payout after the crash. The name on the offshore transfer: Glenstone Acquisitions. The same rabbit trail he'd hinted at during our last call. But there was more. One folder contained a FOIA request submitted by Jesse under a pseudonym. He'd asked for traffic reports, street camera footage, and police blotters from the night of the hit and run. Meaning Jesse wasn't just digging, he was trying to make something official. And now he was gone. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. My eyes were dry, but my brain felt soaked in static. Nate had always been a liar, but a money launderer with a kill switch. That was new. My phone buzzed, slicing through the tension. Rui's calling. I answered without hesitating. Detective. You still tracking your cousin? I didn't lie. Yes. There was a pause. Off the record, what do you know about Jesse Marks? My heartbeat flared. He's a friend. Why I pulled a file today. Someone requested an audit on the police response time the night of the crash. The request was flagged. Whoever filed it knew what to ask for. My fingers clenched around the phone. And that person hasn't been seen in over a week. I stared at the floor. Do you think it's connected? I don't believe in coincidences, Ruiz said. Neither do you. I'm working something, I said. Give me 48 hours. He didn't argue. Just don't get yourself killed. I hate paperwork. He hung up. A new lead was waiting in the queue. Jesse had left a note: auto shop. Small, not digital. Ask for V. It took 2 hours and a dozen false starts, but I finally found the place: a side street garage in Alexandria with rusting signage and a woman named Vanessa who didn't flinch when I said Jesse's name. He said someone might come by, she said, wiping grease from her hands. You saw the car? She nodded. Big black SUV, passenger side was scraped up, broken side mirror. I asked questions he didn't answer. Paid in cash. When morning after that crash on Fielder. He looked like he hadn't slept. I leaned in. Do you have the invoice? She disappeared into a back office, then returned with a faded printout. N. Carter, 7:43 a.m. Right side mirror replaced. Paint buffed. Cash. No card. No ID. I stared at the timestamp. 9 hours. He'd tried to erase it 9 hours after the crash. This is huge, I murmured. Vanessa looked around, voice lowering. That guy Jesse, he said something about being followed. Said if anything happened to him, you'd know. I nodded. Yeah, I know. She touched my arm. Be careful. Back at my apartment, the shadows had grown longer. The laptop buzzed back to life. I was about to upload the invoice scan when a new email notification blinked on my screen. From unknowncryptmail.pro, subject: final warning, stop digging, or you'll end up like him. The message auto-deleted 3 seconds later. I didn't blink. I just stared at the empty inbox, my pulse hammering like a countdown. They thought I was burned out. They were right, but not in the way they expected. The metallic hum of Langley always made my skin itch. It wasn't the security gates or the retinal scanners or the soundproofed corridors that reeked of fluoride and secrets, it was the knowing. Everyone knew too much and said too little. And yet the one thing no one ever seemed to see was the truth that bled through the cracks. We were all expendable. Even the best of us. I walked through the Office of Operations like a ghost. Familiar walls, unfamiliar stairs. I wasn't cleared anymore, not really. I was technically on extended leave, a bureaucratic euphemism for burned. The kind of burn you don't come back from. Agent Price met me outside his office. He didn't smile, just gave a small nod and opened the door. 5 minutes, he said. The room was bare. 2 chairs. 1 desk. No glass, no art. No signs of humanity. That was how they made it feel, like you were no one now. Like the version of you they created had been quietly erased. He slid a sealed folder across the table. I didn't move. You know I'm not supposed to talk to you. Yet here we are. He sighed and leaned forward. Claire, this isn't your fight anymore. It became mine the moment Jesse disappeared. He didn't argue. Instead, he opened the folder and flipped it so I could see. A grainy surveillance photo. Jesse looking tired, unshaven, walking toward a diner in Baltimore. Across the bottom was a red diagonal stamp that made my breath catch. Deceased. Is that real? I asked. Officially, yes. Unofficially. That's all I'm allowed to say. I stared at the photo like it might blink or change. But it stayed the same. Lifeless. Frozen. Jesse knew something I said. Something big. Nate's tied to it. I need to finish this. Price leaned back, arms crossed. Just don't use any old tools. You didn't hear that from me. I took the folder and left without saying goodbye. Darlington felt like it always had stale, too quiet and suffocating in the way only hometowns can be. My mother's house hadn't changed since the 90s. Same floral curtains, same wall-mounted landline, same chill in the hallway no matter the season. She met me at the door with crossed arms and pursed lips. I heard you were sniffing around Nate again, she said, skipping any semblance of pleasantries. I'm not here for him. You're not here for me either. I pushed past her into the foyer. I'm here because Jesse's gone, and I think Nate's involved. She didn't reply, just stood there, arms folded, watching me like I was a bad habit she'd finally kicked and was now back to ruin her routine. I need to check the attic, I said. Of course you do. Upstairs, the air smelled like mothballs and dust. I opened the hatch and climbed into a space filled with cardboard boxes, old coats, and forgotten relics. I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for leverage. I found it in a rusted lockbox wedged behind an old sewing machine. Inside were papers, a cracked photo of my father, and a small black recording device, one of the first I ever owned. Nate had once found it in my glove compartment and laughed. What is this? Claire. You gonna wiretap the PTA? I held it now with hands that didn't shake. It still worked. I pressed play. Static at first, then muffled laughter. Nate's voice slurred and arrogant. Charm Claire. That's the secret. You smile enough they forget what you did. You wear the right suit, shake the right hand, and bam, you're untouchable. I closed my eyes. That tone, that confidence, I knew it too well. He hadn't just lied to protect himself. He believed he was above it all. But then came something I didn't expect. A second voice. Male. Lower. Calm. Not if they find the ledger. I froze. It wasn't Jesse, and it wasn't Price. But it was someone. Someone else knew. Someone else was involved. I pressed rewind. Played it again. Not if they find the ledger. A cold wave rippled down my spine. This wasn't just Nate playing dirty. This was bigger. Connected. Layered. Someone else had skin in the game. And I had just cracked the edge of it open. I was never supposed to be here, Vanessa whispered. But I saw him. I saw everything. The auto shop looked closed from the street lights off and the garage bay doors shuttered, no music blaring from the radio like before. But I knew she was still inside. The side door opened with a slow creak after my knock. Vanessa stepped aside, lips tight, eyes darting down the alley before she closed it behind me and bolted the lock. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Someone came by this morning, asked questions, didn't leave a name." "Then it's a good thing I don't scare easy," I replied. The office hadn't changed, still smelled like burnt coffee and transmission fluid. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, casting long shadows across the cluttered desk. Vanessa didn't sit. She stood by the file cabinet like it might shield her from what came next. "I need you to listen to something I said." I set the recorder down on her desk and pressed play. Nate's voice came through, first arrogant and thick with bourbon charm. "Claire, that's the secret." Vanessa flinched but didn't speak. Then it came, the second voice. The one that had pulled me back here. "Not if they find the ledger." She went pale. "You recorded that?" she whispered. "No," I said. "This was buried in a box in my mother's attic. I didn't even remember it existed until yesterday." Her jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to have that." I leaned in. That voice. "It's you, isn't it?" A pause. Then quietly, "Yeah." She ran her hand through her hair, fingers trembling. "I didn't know it was on tape. That night was blurred. But that's me. Tell me everything I said. Now." She moved to the mini fridge in the corner, pulled out a warm soda, cracked the can open. No glass, no ceremony, just a long sip, like she needed to wet her soul before continuing. "We were arguing," she said. "That night. I'd told Nate I was done. He was drinking too much, talking like he was invincible. We were parked off Fielder Lane. I told him to pull over. He didn't." She swallowed. "And then he hit someone. I didn't breathe. I told him to stop. He didn't. Just kept driving. Said no one saw, said it would disappear like everything else." She turned to face me fully now. The next morning, a lawyer showed up at my apartment. Not his. Mine. Slick suit. Didn't give a name. Just said he worked adjacent to the bureau and handed me a folder. She walked to the drawer, pulled it open, and dropped a thick envelope onto the desk. "I signed it," she said. "He said if I didn't, I'd be the one charged." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement stamped with a seal. I recognized a private legal firm in D.C., known for doing wet work with clean hands. The signature line read, "Vanessa Reyes." "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me this?" She looked at me for a long time. "Because Jesse came to see me. Said someone was laundering money through a real estate trust. Said Nate wasn't just a liar, he was a liability. He left me a voicemail the night before he disappeared. Said if anything happened to him, I'd be next." Her voice cracked. "I've been sleeping in the shop ever since." I placed the recorder gently back into my bag. "You think anyone's going to believe me?" she asked. I signed away my voice. "I don't need them to believe you," I said, rising. "I just need them to hear you. You learn quickly in field work, always check what's under the rug. Especially when they tell you not to." My apartment had transformed into a war room. The walls were now a mosaic of photographs, financial ledgers, sticky notes, and maps linked by red twine and ink. Faces stared back at me, Nate in a tuxedo, Jesse mid-laugh, Vanessa in her coveralls, and others I didn't recognize yet. The chaos looked like obsession, but to me it was structure. It was clarity. And right now it was the only thing that made sense. A knock at the door pulled me away from the timeline. I peeked through the peephole. A delivery guy in a navy jacket stood there looking mildly bored, a padded envelope in his hand. "For Claire Mitchell," I nodded, signed. "No return address?" He shrugged. "Just says urgent, prepaid." Weird weight though. Feels like a drive. As soon as I shut the door, I tore it open. Inside an encrypted USB key with a short note attached in handwriting I recognized instantly. Dead men don't upload from cloud storage. J. Jesse. He must have arranged for this before he disappeared. Or before someone made him disappear. My laptop flared to life. Decryption wasn't easy, took 3 different tools, a secure sandbox environment and a few muscle memory moves I hadn't used since Yemen. When it finally opened, the directory was bluntly labeled N. Carter, shells, ties. I clicked. Dozens of spreadsheets, transaction logs. Wire transfers routed through shell companies with names like Blue Ridge Holdings and Mason Bay Partners, the kind of titles that sounded boring enough to be innocent, except they weren't. Because every transaction pointed back to Nate. One column caught my eye: wire timestamps. I cross-referenced them with a log of Nate's public real estate deals, closing dates, escrow transfers, media releases. Like clockwork, hours after the deals were announced, funds would move offshore, first through a Chicago-based bank, then into an LLC in the Cayman Islands. One of those transfers was on October 12th, the same day Jesse vanished. I sat back, breath catching in my throat. This wasn't embezzlement. This wasn't just some cousin flipping houses and skimming profits. It was laundering. Layered, timed, shielded. And worse, not solo. Because on the final spreadsheet, under a column labeled Consulting Recipient, Legal Oversight, was a name I hadn't seen in years: Walter Lansing. I froze. Walter Lansing, retired DOJ consultant, former liaison for intelligence community investigations into interagency misconduct. He hadn't been in the field since 2016. The last time I saw his name, it was stamped across a file labeled Joint Task Force Redline, a black site corruption probe that vanished before anyone could testify. Why was he on Nate's money trail? I clicked over to Google. Just the name. Nothing fancy. Top result: a charity gala in D.C. last September. A photo captured beneath a crystal chandelier, champagne flutes in hand. And there they were. Nate Carter and Walter Lansing, standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling, like nothing was under the rug. When did silence become your mother tongue? I asked her. She didn't flinch. Margaret Hammond stood at the window, arms folded so tightly they might have fused into her sweater. Outside, the rain painted silver streaks against the glass, tapping gently but insistently, like memories demanding entry. She didn't look at me. That was her gift: disassociation as armor. You always did love the dramatic, she said softly. This isn't theater, Mom. This is about Nate, about Jesse, about what you knew. She turned slightly, just enough to catch my reflection in the mirror beside the bookshelf, but not enough to face me directly. Her house hadn't changed in 20 years. Same porcelain vases, no one touched, same antique clock that ticked like a metronome for her judgment. Even the air was rigid, preserved like museum stillness. You think I knew everything, she said. But sometimes, people know enough to be afraid. I stepped closer. So you were afraid? Of what? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked into the hallway. I followed, passing the framed family portraits, my high school graduation, Nate's wedding, one from some forgotten 4th of July, where I wore a fake smile so wide it nearly split my face. In the hallway closet, she pulled down a battered shoebox. Not labeled, not locked, but covered in dust so thick it left residue on her fingers. She handed it to me like it was a bomb she no longer wanted custody of. Inside were a dozen unopened envelopes, all with my handwriting on the front, some dated as far back as 2011. I swallowed hard. You never opened them, she shrugged. You were CIA. I assumed if I didn't look, it would protect us both. That's not how that works. That's exactly how it works, she said. You built your life in shadows. I chose daylight. We coped in different ways. I pulled out one envelope and tore it open almost without breathing. Inside, a folded letter and a photo I barely remembered placing there. It was a picture of Nate. Younger, clean-shaven, standing beside a man in a navy suit. My breath hitched. Walter Lansing. But this photo wasn't from last year's gala. No, this one was time-stamped July 2nd, 2007. Back porch of Uncle Raymond's house. Family reunion. The same one where I'd excused myself early because Nate made a crack about ghost jobs and paper chases. I held up the photo. Where did this come from? Margaret's eyes darkened. Your uncle did business with him. Lansing. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. You were married to his brother. How could you not ask? Because she said with quiet finality in this family, asking questions meant inheriting answers you couldn't afford to hold. The photo trembled slightly in my hand. Not from her. From me. Because it meant Nate didn't just stumble into corruption. He was groomed for it, raised in it, and worse, protected by it. I looked down at the back of the photo. Someone had written in faded ink, Lansing, fundraiser liaison, our Uncle Raymond. Suddenly the crash, the cover-up Jesse's death. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a pattern. A legacy. I turned to face my mother fully. Your silence didn't protect me, I said. It built them a fortress. She didn't reply, only blinked slowly, then turned back toward the rain-drenched window. Behind her, I stared at the photo, Nate grinning, already part of something far bigger. And I knew the truth didn't start with the crash. It started long before either of us knew what kind of family we were in. The difference between missing and dead is a file folder. Jesse didn't get one. The Federal Archives building was always colder than I remembered. Not temperature-wise, though the HVAC hissed like a dying lung, but in atmosphere. No voices, just the click-clack of heels on linoleum and the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It smelled like paper dust and bureaucracy, stale in a way that made my jaw tighten. I told the records clerk I was requesting information on a deceased federal asset, Jesse Carter. She typed slowly, peering at her screen with the squint of someone 2 years past retirement. No record of death or disappearance, she said after a moment. My hands twitched at my sides. That's impossible. She gave a half shrug. If it exists, it's classified. I'm cleared for Class 4 active ops debrief. Check again. She looked at me now properly. Are you active? No, I said. But neither is Jesse. I walked out before she could reply. Outside, the morning light was sharp, cutting across my eyes, as if the sun didn't care someone was missing. My next stop wasn't on any list, it wasn't in any file either, but Jesse once told me years ago over a rare bottle of good bourbon and a burned steak that if anything ever happened, his family had a plot out in Marlow Creek Cemetery. Behind the row of fake headstones, he'd said with a grin, "The government loves a memorial with no names." The cemetery sat on a slope, rain-soaked and quiet, the grass wet enough to bite through my boots. I walked past polished marble etched with careful lies, devoted father, patriot, beloved husband, until I found the space that didn't belong. Unmarked. Just a single flat stone, no inscription. Grass growing slightly uneven around its edges, like even nature wasn't sure how to treat it. I crouched. At first, nothing. No flowers, no trinkets. Just silence. Then I saw it. A small plastic sleeve half buried in the dirt beneath the base, sealed watertight, and old enough that the edges had begun to fray. I pulled it free, hands trembling not from fear, but from the finality I wasn't ready for. Inside a scrap of paper, Jessie's handwriting, unmistakable even in fading ink. For her eyes only. Beneath it, a Dropbox key, one I recognized as his personal encryption protocol. It would bypass every government system, and one line of instructions scrawled in the kind of unsteady rush that came only when you knew time was running out. Finish what I couldn't. I stared at the words until my eyes blurred. The last time I heard Jesse's voice, it had cracked on the edges. Not from fear, but from knowing. knowing he'd gotten too close, knowing they'd come. He was the only one who believed me when I said something wasn't right with Nate. The only one who never asked for proof, just helped me find it. And they buried him under nothing. Not even his name. I stood up, fists clenched, knuckles white. Somewhere in the trees, birds chirped like none of this mattered, like life had moved on. But I hadn't. I held the note, the key, the memory of a man who died chasing the truth no one else wanted. And I said the words aloud into the wind, the cold, the silence for whoever was still listening. I will. My childhood room was frozen in time, except now it had secrets buried under the floor. The wallpaper hadn't changed. Still the faded constellation pattern from when I was 11 and obsessed with stars. The books on the shelf were exactly where I left them, their spines warped from the humidity. Even the ceramic horse lamp on the desk with its chipped ear and soft yellow glow hummed with the silence of things left untouched too long. And yet the room was wrong. Not visually, but in feel. Like a stage set left standing long after the actors had died. I closed the door behind me and dropped to my knees. I didn't need to search, I knew exactly which board gave way. I'd pried it up hundreds of times as a teenager, mostly to hide contraband or a journal I'd later burn. This time, the creak felt louder. More final. I slipped my fingers under the edge and lifted the panel. Dust. Dry rot. And beneath it, a long-forgotten metal tin wedged between the joists. Inside, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth sealed tight with tape that had yellowed at the edges. I peeled it back. My old CIA issue mini recorder sat nestled on top, its scratched surface still glinting faintly in the dim light. I turned it over in my hand, heart ticking faster. The data chip inside had survived, no doubt encrypted, no doubt overlooked. Underneath it, stacked carefully, were a dozen photos printed on matte paper. I recognized the marina immediately. Eagles Point, just off Route 7. And Nate there, he was in plain daylight in conversation with a man whose face was turned from the camera, but whose posture I'd learned to read like a second language. Walter Lansing. In one photo, Lansing handed Nate a briefcase. In another, they shook hands. A third captured Nate checking over his shoulder. None of them were dated, but I didn't need metadata. I remembered the day I took them. I'd been tailing Lansing on a completely separate suspicion, something small. And then Nate had shown up like he belonged there. I hadn't reported it, because I hadn't wanted to believe it. Beneath the photos, a thick envelope rested at the bottom of the tin. It was sealed with wax, unnecessary, old-fashioned, but a trick Jesse had taught me. Inside was a small ledger. I opened it slowly. It wasn't just a list. It was a map. Shell companies with benign names, Grayside Holdings, Wilburn Logistics, Pax Trust, all real estate fronts. Under each, a series of deposits, withdrawals, and notations. And names. Too many names. Then there it was. A single payout dated 2 days after the hit and run. $250,000 wired to V. DeLeon via Camden and Price LLP. I felt my breath catch. Vanessa had never told me the amount, but the firm, I knew it. Camden and Price was Lansing's legal stronghold. Half their associates carried federal clearance and ties to past lobbying scandals. And this line in the ledger next to the transfer, it was initialed. L.D. Lansing's paralegal. I'd seen her once. At a hearing I wasn't supposed to be attending. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was evidence. Tangible. Verifiable. Time-stamped. The silence of the room broke with a soft knock. My mother stood at the door, not entering. Her expression was unreadable, an old photograph of herself, vaguely curious, vaguely tired. "Lunch is ready," she said quietly. "I'm not hungry." She hesitated. "You used to hide everything in there." "I still do," I said. She nodded and left. No questions, no judgments. I stayed kneeling, the open tin before me, surrounded by evidence that had waited years for someone to take it seriously. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled until I found the contact, Agent Rourke. one of the last people at Langley who hadn't turned a blind eye when Jesse vanished. The line rang once, twice. "Mitchell," he answered, his voice tight. "I'm ready to testify. She has a badge." Rourke said flatly, and a sworn statement. "That makes her dangerous." The room smelled like bleach and paper, the kind of sterile neutrality designed to erase a memory or at least obscure it. Beige walls, two-way mirror, silent recording light blinking in the upper corner. The conference room inside the FBI field office felt like a morgue for secrets. I slid the stack of documents across the table, watching Agent Collins raise an eyebrow as he opened the first folder. Photos, bank ledgers, USB printouts, voice logs, dates, timestamps, and Jesse's final Dropbox key decrypted and organized, the last relic of a man who'd trusted me enough to die quietly for the truth. "This is extensive," Collins murmured. "It's just the surface," I said. "But it's enough." Agent Rourke stood near the door, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't looked at me since we entered. Maybe he was still angry. Maybe he was scared. Maybe both. Collins flipped through the pages. "This places Nathaniel Carter in at least 3 overlapping crimes: obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and accessory to vehicular manslaughter. Potentially more, depending on how deep Lansing's involvement goes. He's been laundering money through fake land trusts since at least 2018, I said. Longer if we dig further." Rourke finally spoke. "You think the DOJ didn't know?" I turned toward him. "I think someone made sure they didn't care." Silence fell. Collins leaned back, steepling his fingers. "We have enough to open formal proceedings," he said. "But the question now is jurisdiction. This started as a state-level hit and run. If we move forward federally, we have to tie it to a broader conspiracy." "It is broader," I said. Jesse tried to expose it. He was silenced. Vanessa was bribed and gagged. My own agency sat on evidence. This isn't just Nate. Rourke shook his head slightly, like he was arguing with himself more than with me. "You understand the political cost of going after a former DOJ consultant. Lansing's reach goes back decades." "I don't care." He looked up at me then. Really looked. "You were warned off," he said quietly. "You kept going." "So did Jesse," I replied. The words hovered there, fragile and sharp. Collins cleared his throat. "Do you have any prior objections to appearing in court press scrutiny? Personal security?" "None." Rourke walked to the edge of the table, picked up the photo of Nate and Lansing at the marina, studied it for a beat. "Why now?" he asked. "You've been sitting on parts of this for years." "I wasn't ready," I said. I kept thinking someone else would step up. But no one did. A flash of memory flickered: Nate, 19, standing in front of a broken window he'd shattered with a baseball, smiling like the glass had been asking for it. My aunt blamed me. Nate didn't correct her. It started there, I think. The comfort of getting away with it. Collins shut the folder and exhaled. "We have to notify the U.S. attorney. If this goes forward, you'll be deposed, possibly subpoenaed, and you'll need to testify in open court." "Good," I said. Rourke looked at me again. Something unreadable passed across his face. Admiration, regret. I didn't care anymore. Collins leaned forward, folding his hands. "Then you'll do it publicly. In court." "We're not here for justice." Nate's lawyer smirked. "We're here for the show." He said it so casually, like a waiter explaining tonight's specials. The courtroom buzzed with side whispers, camera flashes muffled by velvet curtains, and the hollow sound of shuffling paper. I sat in the witness chair, spine straight, heart calm, at least on the surface. Underneath, everything boiled. Nate wouldn't look at me. Not directly. He sat behind his team of lawyers, one hand resting casually on the polished defense table, the other tapping a rhythm on his thigh. Arrogant. Relaxed. As if this were just another business deal. As if the dead didn't matter. The prosecution began with what they had to the hit and run. The physical evidence, the time-stamped photographs, the witness statements, the shell companies. the cash transactions, the silence, and then me. Agent Collins nodded to me from the gallery as I walked to the stand. My heels echoed across the floor. I could feel the press eyes following me. I wasn't dressed for revenge, just truth. Gray blazer, simple blouse. No statement jewelry, no tears, no drama. State your name for the record, the prosecutor asked. Claire Mitchell. And your former occupation operations officer, CIA. There it was. A ripple moved through the room. I could almost hear the tabloids writing themselves. They led me through the basic timeline. My suspicions. Jesse's file. The marina photos. The ledger. The recordings. I spoke clearly. Without venom. Just facts. Then came the cross-examination. Nate's lead counsel stood a man too polished to trust, with eyes like stale water and a voice practiced in weaponized charm. Ms. Mitchell, he began, you claim to be a retired intelligence officer, yet there's no publicly accessible record of your service. I tilted my head slightly. That's generally how intelligence work functions. A few chuckles. He didn't like that. He paced. Isn't it true you were placed on psychiatric watch after your final deployment objection? Overruled. Yes, I said. Post-traumatic stress, common among field agents. He pounced. So you were unstable. I was injured. I received treatment. And I recovered. He grinned. But not before burning through several aliases and dropping off the grid. Correct. That was procedure. And isn't it also true? He continued, that your cousin, my client, tried to support you during this difficult time? I stared at him. Support. He held up a Thanksgiving photo, Nate with his arm around me. I remembered that day. I just buried a contact in Berlin. Nate had called me the family screw-up over dessert. He told everyone I was unemployed, I said evenly, that I was between identities. More whispers. The judge called for order. He leaned closer, lowering his voice for effect. Maybe this isn't about justice. Maybe this is about embarrassment. A family feud. A cousin scorned. I didn't flinch. You're right. He blinked. This is personal, I said. Because if someone had taken me seriously a year ago, Jesse Carter might still be alive. And that's when I pulled the envelope from my bag. Your Honor, I said, holding it up. With permission, I'd like to submit a sworn affidavit from a new witness. The courtroom stirred. Even Nate looked up this time. The bailiff walked it over. The judge scanned it briefly before passing it to the defense table. It's signed, I said. Dated. Witnessed. The woman was in the car the night of the crash. The defense lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The side door opened, and Vanessa stepped inside. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She walked slowly, purposefully, and took a seat behind the prosecution table. Her eyes met mine, then moved to Nate. He went pale. Didn't think your secrets would look this bad in daylight, huh? Vanessa whispered to Nate as he passed. He didn't respond, just stared straight ahead, lips pressed, thin eyes flickering toward the gallery where the press had multiplied like flies to a corpse. The courthouse felt different on day 3. Heavier, like the walls themselves had absorbed too many secrets and were now ready to spit them out. The silence before Vanessa took the stand was the kind that precedes either a verdict or a storm. She wore no makeup, no theatrics, just the truth. The prosecution led her carefully through the night of the crash. Her voice never cracked even when describing how Nate had been drinking, how the argument escalated in the car, how the deer came out of nowhere, and how it wasn't a deer at all. I saw a person, she said. I screamed. He didn't break. The room shifted. Even Nate's lead attorney shifted in his seat. Vanessa described the moment of impact, the sound, the silence after, how Nate didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove. How they pulled into the garage and how she begged him to call someone, how he didn't. And then the prosecutor asked. A man came to the house. Not police, not a lawyer, but someone with credentials, government-looking. He gave me this. She pulled the non-disclosure agreement from her purse, holding it like it burned her fingers. He said I was protecting national interests. He said if I spoke, I'd be endangering intelligence operations. And did you believe him? She looked toward me then, back at the jury. Yes. Until Claire found me. The prosecutor entered into evidence the bribe transaction coded through Lansing's paralegal. Time-stamped. Cross-matched to Vanessa's account. The dollar amount identical to the figure listed in the ledger I had recovered under my childhood floor. The room exhaled together. The defense team objected. Loudly. Repeatedly. Sustained in part, the judge ruled. But the affidavit stands. The financial trail stands. The NDA stands. And so did the case. Next came Jesse's brother. Quiet, tense jaw clenched like he'd been holding it for years. His testimony wasn't long, but it was sharp. He talked about the night Jesse disappeared. The last voicemail. The panic in his voice. The name Nate spoken once and then cut off. When the prosecution played the voicemail for the court, no one moved. It was crackly muffled but clear enough. I think they know I have it. Nate, he's static. Claire, if I don't make it look in the Marina files. That was all. But it was enough. The defense tried to recover. They called a character witness, a college friend of Nate's. She spoke about charity work, real estate growth, how deeply Nate cares about community. But no one was listening anymore. Because I was. From my seat, I noticed Nate's fingers twitching. A soft tremble at first, then a full shake. He tried to hide it, tucking his hands beneath the table, then clasping them tight. But it was there. Cracks in the golden nephew facade. The confident smile gone. The control slipping. And as I watched him try to hold it together, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt certainty. He knows it's over. It took 12 years of silence, and exactly 12 minutes of jury deliberation. The courtroom was silent not out of respect, but from sheer disbelief at how quickly it ended. No one expected it to be that fast. 12 minutes. I'd waited 12 years clawing my way through secrets and doubt, and 1,000 ways to forget. But justice didn't come in slow motion. It arrived like a gavel striking wood. Madam Foreperson, the judge intoned, has the jury reached a verdict? We have your honor. The woman stood mid-40s, hair pulled back in the kind of bun that meant she didn't suffer fools. She didn't look at Nate. Just read the paper. On the charge of vehicular manslaughter, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to suppress evidence, guilty. Each word struck with surgical precision. Nate's mouth tightened, but he didn't blink. Even as the murmur grew behind him, press gallery, distant family members who'd once praised his smile at barbecues, he remained still. Like he could outlast the noise if he just kept his jaw locked. But silence didn't save him this time. Sarah stood slowly from the back row. No purse, no coat, just a face drained of anything that once looked like love. She walked the aisle past him, never turned her head. Not once. Nate shifted just slightly, maybe expecting a glance, a flicker of sympathy. It never came. 2 officers moved to cuff him. He didn't resist, just stared forward as the metal clinked around his wrists. His tie remained perfectly knotted. His image, still curated, still rehearsed, died quietly under the weight of justice. And I stood near the door, back, straight hand steady. The press exploded outside. I heard the snapping of camera shutters even through the courtroom walls. But inside, everything slowed. The judge turned toward me. Ms. Hammond, he said, using the last name tied to my retired identity, we thank you for your service. A formal statement, meant to acknowledge the testimony, the documents, the damage. But I felt something deeper in it, an unspoken truth, that maybe, just Maybe the institution that once asked me to vanish had now finally seen me. I didn't respond aloud. I nodded once. That was enough. The bailiff called the next case. The courtroom emptied around me. Nate was already being led down the hall, press in tow microphones bobbing the chaos, beginning anew. But I walked out the other way, into a quieter corridor, one where no one followed, until I reached the heavy front doors and stepped into the open daylight. And there she was, my mother, standing on the courthouse steps, raincoat draped over her arm, hair a little thinner than I remembered, hands folded in front of her like she wasn't sure if she should open them or not. We stared at each other. No embrace, no apology, just an acknowledgement. She gave the smallest nod, and this time I nodded back. "You could come home now," my mother said, "or you could go be extraordinary again." Her voice was quieter than usual, like she wasn't entirely sure she had the right to speak at all. We were sitting across from each other at the old oak table, the same one where she once corrected my posture with a ruler, where I used to fold napkins into perfect triangles just to feel useful. Outside, the light was diffused through overcast skies, rain clinging to the window panes, like it had nowhere else to go. Inside, the silence between us was not hostile anymore, just heavy, and full of things we'd left unsaid for too many years. "I didn't think you'd come back here," she said. "I didn't think I'd want to." She looked at me carefully, as if seeing something new in my face. "You seemed ordinary. So lost." I laughed softly. I was trained to seem ordinary. She looked down at her hands. "That was always the hardest part for me, Claire. You disappeared into your own life. I didn't know how to reach you, so I stopped trying. I told myself it was your fault. But it wasn't." I didn't respond right away. The words felt like an offering she'd been holding in her chest for decades. I let the silence sit. I wanted her to feel it land. "I never needed you to understand," I said. "I just needed you to ask." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back with practiced restraint. "Then let me ask now. What happens next?" I stood and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Closure." Jesse's grave was where it always had been, second row from the west-facing tree next to an unmarked plot with only a single rose ever placed on it. I remembered he used to joke about being forgotten, like he saw it coming before any of us did. The air was cool and clean. Fall leaves rustled underfoot. I pulled a folded photo from my pocket. Us 23 and full of secrets, smiling on the first day of training. He had a crooked grin like he already knew the mess we were stepping into. I'd written 5 words on the back. We finished it. "Claire." I tucked it into the dirt, pressing it against the headstone gently, like laying a memory to rest. My phone buzzed. Collins. "You could come back in," he said. "DC's reopening the cyber investigations wing. Your Dropbox made waves. Lansing's being subpoenaed. This could get bigger." I looked out over the graves, the stillness. "I'm not done," I replied, "but I'm not coming back." "Not yet." "You sure?" "No," I said. "But for once that feels okay." Back at the house, a small fire crackled in the backyard pit. My mother had gone inside. I was alone again, but not lonely. I pulled out the last envelope one Nate had sent from holding unopened, addressed in that perfect practiced script he used when lying to wedding guests. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tossed it into the fire. The paper curled inward, turning black around the edges. I didn't watch it disintegrate completely. I didn't need to. Inside the living room, the television was still on. I caught the news anchor mid-sentence as I walked past Walter Lansing, former DOJ consultant, now facing federal investigation for obstruction and conspiracy to commit fraud. Sources close to the case suggest more indictments may follow. I didn't stop to listen. There would always be another monster behind the curtain. But for now, one had fallen. And sometimes, that was enough. I opened the front door, letting the breeze follow me in. The house smelled like old wood and lemon polish. My mother had made tea. I could hear her in the kitchen humming faintly. I didn't know what came next. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing ghosts. I wasn't hiding from them either. I was just here. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together.